On the quiet shores of Long Island stands a mansion so massive, so eerily beautiful, that it feels less like a home and more like a monument to something forbidden. Winfield Hall was never meant to be ordinary. Built in 1917 by Helena Woolworth McCann, the daughter of retail tycoon Frank W. Woolworth, this estate was designed to reflect unimaginable wealth. But behind its marble walls, something far darker took root. From the moment construction began, whispers followed the project. Workers spoke of unusual blueprints, symbols etched into stonework, geometric patterns that didn't match traditional architecture. Staircases were intentionally misaligned. Rooms were built without clear purpose. Doors opened to walls. Hallways led nowhere. These were not mistakes. According to rumors, they were deliberate, inspired by ancient occult principles meant to redirect energy. As the mansion neared completion, the atmosphere reportedly changed. Laborers refused to work after sunset. Tools went missing only to reappear in sealed rooms. Some claimed they heard chanting echoing through the unfinished halls, even when no one else was present. Official records dismissed these claims, but the stories never stopped. Once the family moved in, Winfield Hall became a place of isolation rather than celebration. Guests complained of overwhelming dread, sudden nausea, and the feeling of being watched. Servants spoke of shadows moving against candlelight, of footsteps pacing above empty rooms, of bells ringing without being touched. Some quit without explanation. Others stayed, and later suffered breakdowns, plagued by vivid nightmares and hallucinations tied to the house. The mansion's upper floors were said to be the worst. Certain rooms were kept locked at all times, their keys carried only by select individuals. One sealed chamber, according to legend, was used for secret gatherings, ritualistic in nature, where powerful elites explored forbidden beliefs popular among some high society circles of the early 20th century. Spiritualism, seances, and occult experiments were fashionable among the rich, but Winfield Hall was rumored to go much further. Tragedy soon followed. Members of the household fell ill under mysterious circumstances. Sudden deaths occurred, officially labeled as natural causes, though the timing raised eyebrows. Marriages collapsed. Fortunes dwindled. One by one, those connected to the mansion seemed cursed by loss, madness, or ruin. When the Woolworth family eventually abandoned Winfield Hall, the curse did not end. New owners arrived with optimism and left with regret. Financial collapse, lawsuits, fires, and unexplained accidents followed each transfer. Some owners barely lasted months. Others invested millions, only to walk away in silence, refusing to speak about their time inside. Locals began avoiding the estate. Taxi drivers refused late night drop-offs. Teenagers who trespassed told stories of whispers calling their names, of cold hands brushing their shoulders, of doors slamming shut behind them. Even today, long after renovations and restorations, workers claim certain rooms feel wrong, as if the walls themselves are alive and remembering. Winfield Hall still stands, grand, elegant, and terrifyingly quiet. A mansion born from wealth, shaped by secrecy, and forever haunted by the question no one dares to answer. Was the curse real, or did the Woolworth family unlock something that was never meant to be disturbed? Winfield Hall was never meant to be simply a home. From the moment the idea was conceived, it was designed to stand as a physical declaration of dominance, an unmistakable message carved into stone that the Woolworth Empire had not merely succeeded, but had surpassed every other fortune of its time. Helena Woolworth McCann, daughter of retail magnate Frank W. Woolworth, did not commission a mansion to live in quietly. She commissioned a palace meant to be seen, whispered about, and envied. At the height of America's Gilded Age excess, wealth was a form of language, and Winfield Hall was written in the loudest possible terms. The estate sprawled across the Long Island shoreline, its sheer scale rivaling European palaces. With more than 50 rooms, towering marble columns, and ceilings high enough to swallow sound, the mansion was built to overwhelm anyone who stepped inside. Nothing about it invited comfort. Everything demanded submission to grandeur. The cost alone was staggering. Millions of dollars, an obscene sum for the era, were poured into its construction without hesitation. Rare marbles were imported from Italy, hand-carved by artisans brought across the Atlantic. Iron gates were forged to resemble those of Renaissance estates, while the exterior stonework was intentionally aged to give the illusion of ancient authority, as if the Woolworth name had ruled for centuries rather than decades. Even the location was chosen carefully. Positioned to dominate the coastline, Winfield Hall could be seen from far out at sea, standing like a fortress rather than a residence. Helena oversaw details personally, rejecting anything that felt ordinary. Rooms were expanded beyond practical necessity, simply to emphasize scale. Corridors stretched unnaturally long. Doors were oversized, forcing guests to look up as they entered, a subtle psychological reminder of their insignificance in comparison to the wealth that built the house. This was not accidental. Power, after all, is as much about perception as it is possession. The mansion became a stage where elite society performed its rituals of excess. Lavish gatherings filled the halls. Politicians, industrialists, bankers, and cultural elites moved beneath crystal chandeliers the size of small rooms. Conversations echoed off stone walls, polished to a mirror sheen. Yet even during these grand events, many guests later recalled a strange discomfort, an unshakable sense that the house itself was watching, judging, measuring everyone who entered. Winfield Hall represented the darker side of American ambition. Frank Woolworth's empire had been built on mass consumption, on selling inexpensive goods to millions. The mansion, however, was the opposite, unreachable, exclusive, and intentionally intimidating. It was wealth elevated beyond necessity, bordering on obsession. Some critics of the era quietly suggested that it symbolized the moral imbalance of extreme fortune, a place where money stopped serving purpose and began demanding worship. Even the servants felt it. Staff were numerous, yet the house never felt alive. Sounds were swallowed by thick stone walls. Footsteps disappeared into the vastness. Workers often avoided certain rooms, claiming the mansion felt heavier at night, as though the weight of wealth itself pressed down on them. For a building meant to showcase triumph, it radiated isolation. Winfield Hall stood as proof that power, when pushed to its extreme, can become something cold and oppressive. It was a monument not just to success, but to control over space, over people, over legacy. And while it dazzled the outside world, those who spent time within its walls would later admit that the mansion did not feel like a celebration of wealth. It felt like a challenge to it, as though the house was daring its owners to confront the cost of possessing everything. From the earliest sketches, it was clear that Winfield Hall was not being designed according to conventional architectural logic. While the mansion publicly followed the Renaissance revival style popular among America's elite, those who worked closely on the project noticed something unsettling beneath the elegance. The symmetry was deliberate, but not comforting. Rooms aligned in patterns that felt mathematical rather than practical, as if the house were laid out according to a hidden code instead of human convenience. Architects and craftsmen were instructed to follow exact measurements that seemed unnecessary, even obsessive. Certain halls were built to precise lengths that matched obscure numerological ratios. Staircases curved at unusual angles, never rising in straight, predictable lines. Some steps were slightly narrower than others, a detail dismissed as decorative, yet it subtly disrupted balance and orientation. Visitors often reported feeling disoriented, unsure how they had arrived in a particular wing, or why the return path felt unfamiliar. Symbols were woven quietly into the structure, disguised as ornamentation. Repeating motifs, circles within squares, interlocking triangles, and 8 pointed stars appeared in floor mosaics, iron railings, and ceiling carvings. To the untrained eye, they looked like European design flourishes. To those familiar with esoteric traditions, they resembled sigils associated with protection, invocation, and power. These designs were never discussed openly, and when questioned, supervisors insisted they were purely aesthetic. Perhaps most unsettling were the rooms that appeared to serve no logical purpose. Narrow chambers without windows, alcoves sealed behind thick stone, doors that opened into darkness or blank walls. One wing of the mansion contained a circular room, unlike any other. Its acoustics strangely altered, so that whispers carried while loud voices seemed muted. Some believed the room was built to amplify intention, rather than sound, a concept rooted in occult belief, rather than architecture. Light itself was manipulated in unnatural ways. Windows were placed to allow sunlight to enter only at specific times of day, illuminating certain symbols on the floor or walls for mere minutes before fading again. At dusk, shadows stretched into sharp geometric forms that mirrored the hidden designs carved into the stone. Servants claimed the house looked different depending on the hour, as if it shifted its expression with the sun. Even the foundations were rumored to be unusual. Construction workers whispered that objects were buried beneath the cornerstone, items never listed in official records. Some claimed they saw sealed boxes lowered into the ground during a private nighttime ceremony. Others insisted symbols were carved into the bedrock itself before the foundation was poured. These stories were dismissed as superstition, yet none of the workers involved ever spoke publicly about what they witnessed. Movement through Winfield Hall felt intentional, almost guided. Hallways subtly curved, redirecting foot traffic towards central spaces. Certain paths always led back to the same rooms, no matter which turn was taken. Guests often joked about getting lost, but the unease in their voices suggested something deeper. The mansion seemed to pull people inward, toward its core, rather than letting them drift freely. What made these architectural choices truly disturbing was their consistency. Every detail aligned with a singular purpose, though no one ever admitted what that purpose was. The house did not feel built for living. It felt constructed to contain something, an idea, an energy, a belief system rooted in secrecy and control. Winfield Hall was not merely decorated with symbols. It was shaped by them. Stone by stone, corridor by corridor, the mansion embodied a worldview where architecture was more than shelter. It was a tool, a silent instrument designed to influence those within its walls, long after the original intentions had faded into rumor and fear. Winfield Hall was filled with spaces that were never acknowledged on official blueprints. To the public, the mansion's layout appeared grand, but straightforward. To those who lived and worked inside it, the house revealed a second identity, one made of concealed corridors, locked doors, and rooms that seemed deliberately erased from memory. Servants were often the first to notice inconsistencies. A wall that sounded hollow when tapped. A fireplace that concealed a narrow opening behind its stonework. Staircases that ended too abruptly, their final steps flush against paneled walls that bore no handles. Over time, staff learned that the mansion was larger on the inside than it appeared from the outside. A realization that made many deeply uncomfortable. Hidden passages threaded through the walls like veins. Some were narrow enough to force a person sideways, while others were tall and reinforced, suggesting they were meant for frequent use. These corridors connected distant wings of the house, without passing through public rooms, allowing unseen movement throughout the mansion. Late at night, servants claimed to hear footsteps moving through these passages, even when no one was officially awake. Several chambers were permanently sealed. Their doors were reinforced with iron brackets, their locks old and unusually complex. No keys were ever left with household staff. These rooms were said to be accessible only to a select few, and only at certain times. The most disturbing part was that some of these sealed spaces appeared well maintained, dust-free, as if someone still entered them regularly despite official denials. One chamber in particular became the center of rumor. Located deep within the mansion's core, it was reportedly circular, with no visible windows and a floor marked by inlaid stone patterns, unlike any other in the house. Those who claimed to have seen it described strange stains on the marble, darkened patches that cleaners were instructed never to scrub. Candles were occasionally found melted down to their bases nearby, though no events were ever scheduled in that wing. Servants spoke quietly of late-night gatherings, lights burning where none should be, the low murmur of voices echoing through vents and walls. Sometimes music, slow, rhythmic, almost ceremonial, would drift through the house long after guests had departed. The following mornings, staff were ordered to avoid certain areas until further notice. Hidden mechanisms were rumored to exist as well, panels that shifted when pressed in specific sequences, shelves that rotated, revealing narrow doorways. One groundskeeper claimed he once followed a senior household member through what appeared to be a solid wall, only to lose sight of them entirely. He resigned days later without explanation. The secrecy bred fear. Some servants believed the chambers were used for private meetings among elites experimenting with forbidden practices fashionable in secretive social circles of the era. Others believed they were older than the mansion itself, repurposed rather than built, as if Winfield Hall had been constructed around something already there. What made the rumors persist was the silence. No official explanations were ever given. Anyone who asked too many questions found themselves dismissed or transferred. Over time, the house trained its occupants to accept what they did not understand and to look away from what they should not see. Winfield Hall became known not just for what it displayed, but for what it concealed. The sealed chambers remained untouched in public records, yet alive in whispered stories. And within those whispers grew the belief that the mansion was not merely hiding rooms, but preserving rituals, secrets, and intentions never meant to be revealed. From the earliest days of occupancy, those who spent time inside Winfield Hall began to report experiences that could not be explained by architecture alone. At first, they were dismissed as nerves, new servants overwhelmed by the mansion's scale, guests unsettled by its cold grandeur. But as the accounts accumulated, patterns emerged that were too consistent to ignore. Sounds were the most common complaint. Footsteps echoed through upper floors long after midnight, slow and deliberate, as if someone were pacing with purpose. Servants would pause in hallways, holding their breath, convinced they were about to encounter another person, only to find the corridors empty. These footsteps did not resemble the random creaks of an old house. They followed rhythms. Sometimes they stopped abruptly outside bedroom doors, lingering just long enough to be noticed before fading away. Whispers were reported next. Soft, indistinct murmurs drifting through air vents, behind walls, beneath staircases. No clear words could be identified, yet listeners often claimed the voices felt personal, as if addressing them directly. One maid later described the sensation as being spoken to without language, a presence pressing against her thoughts rather than her ears. She resigned shortly after, refusing to step foot inside the mansion again. Shadows behaved unnaturally. In candlelight and early electric glow, figures appeared where no bodies stood. Dark shapes slid along walls against the direction of light, stretching and shrinking as if alive. Guests sometimes mistook these shadows for servants, attempting to speak to them, only to watch them dissolve into nothing. More disturbing were the reports that some shadows lingered, unmoving, even when the light source shifted. Several guests claimed to see figures in peripheral vision tall, silhouettes at the ends of corridors, motionless forms standing in doorways, faces reflected briefly in mirrors before vanishing. When they turned to look directly, the figures were gone. These visions often occurred in the same locations, near sealed rooms, beneath stairwells, or along the mansion's inner halls, where windows were absent. The visions were not limited to sight alone. Some guests experienced sudden waves of nausea, vertigo, or overwhelming dread upon entering certain rooms. A few reported vivid mental images that felt intrusive and foreign. Stone floors slick with moisture, circles of candlelight, faces obscured by darkness. These images came without warning and disappeared just as quickly, leaving behind a sense of violation rather than imagination. Servants spoke of rooms that seemed to change when unobserved. Furniture subtly shifted. Doors found unlocked after being secured. Candles extinguished without drafts. At night, bells rang softly in distant wings, summoning staff to locations where no one had called. After a time, many learned to ignore the bells altogether. Sleep offered no refuge. Nightmares plagued both staff and guests, often mirroring one another despite no shared conversation. Dreams of endless hallways, of being watched from above, of standing inside rooms they did not recognize, but somehow knew intimately. Several people described waking with the certainty that they had not been alone during the night. What unsettled many most was the feeling of awareness. Winfield Hall did not feel empty when quiet. It felt attentive, as though the house itself observed its occupants, registering their presence, responding subtly to their fear. Some guests laughed it off publicly, but privately avoided returning. Others stayed only briefly before fabricating excuses to leave. Over time, these experiences became an unspoken truth among those connected to the mansion. No official records acknowledged them. No explanations were offered. Yet the stories spread quietly, layered atop one another, forming a shared understanding. Winfield Hall did not merely shelter people. It revealed itself to them through sound, shadow, and visions that felt far too intentional to be coincidence. As the years passed, the reputation of Winfield Hall shifted from eccentric to ominous. What could once be dismissed as coincidence began to resemble a pattern, one marked by decline, illness, and sudden, irreversible change in those who lived within its walls. The mansion did not erupt in tragedy all at once. Instead, it wore people down slowly, methodically, as if time itself behaved differently inside. Illness was often the first sign. Residents who arrived in perfect health began to complain of persistent fatigue, headaches that resisted treatment, and sudden weakness that doctors could not explain. Some developed respiratory problems, despite clean air and immaculate surroundings. Others suffered from unexplained fevers that came and went without diagnosis. Medical specialists were brought in, tests were performed, rest was prescribed, but recovery never truly came. Symptoms would fade briefly, only to return worse than before. More disturbing were the changes in behavior. People known for sharp minds and strong temperaments became withdrawn, anxious, or irrational. Sudden mood swings were common. Laughter gave way to silence. Confidence collapsed into paranoia. Several residents became obsessed with locking doors, counting steps, or avoiding specific rooms without being able to articulate why. Some insisted the house was influencing their thoughts, though they struggled to explain how. Mental breakdowns followed a similar trajectory. Sleeplessness turned into hallucinations. Anxiety deepened into fear. Fear hardened into certainty, certainty that something was wrong, something unseen and hostile. A few individuals became convinced they were being watched constantly, even in empty rooms. Mirrors were covered. Curtains were kept drawn during the day. Conversations grew fragmented, as if the mansion itself interfered with clarity of thought. Deaths, when they occurred, were officially recorded as natural or accidental. Sudden heart failures, mysterious falls down staircases, illnesses that progressed far too rapidly. Yet those familiar with the household noticed how frequently these events occurred and how closely they followed periods of intense distress. People would decline mentally, then physically, as though the two were inseparable within the mansion's influence. Even those who escaped did not always recover. Former residents carried lingering effects, nervous tics, recurring nightmares, unexplained dread when discussing their time at Winfield Hall. Some refused to speak of it at all. Others attempted to rationalize their experiences, attributing them to stress or coincidence. Yet their voices often faltered when pressed for details. Doctors, lawyers, and clergy were consulted discreetly. No single explanation satisfied everyone. Medical reports contradicted one another. Psychological evaluations offered vague diagnoses, but no clear cause. The only constant was the house itself, the one factor shared by every case. Servants observed these declines quietly, powerless to intervene. They watched strong personalities unravel, witnessed arguments erupt from nothing, and saw residents retreat into isolation within a home, designed for grandeur and life. Some servants left before the damage spread to them. Others stayed too long and carried the consequences with them. What terrified people most was the sense of inevitability. Once someone settled into Winfield Hall, change seemed unavoidable. The mansion did not strike suddenly, it lingered. It pressed. It waited. And over time, those who lived there appeared to lose not just their health or stability, but something less visible, their sense of control. The accumulation of these events transformed rumor into belief. Winfield Hall was no longer spoken of as merely unlucky. It was described as corrosive, a place that did not kill indiscriminately, but instead unraveled its inhabitants piece by piece, leaving behind death, illness, or minds permanently altered, after the original family withdrew from Winfield Hall. The mansion entered a long and troubled afterlife, one marked by a revolving door of owners, each arriving with ambition and leaving with loss. On paper, the estate was a prized vast land, architectural prestige, and a name tied to one of America's greatest fortunes. In reality, it became something closer to a test, one that no owner seemed able to pass. The first new proprietors arrived confident they could reclaim the mansion's glory. Renovations began almost immediately, yet progress stalled in strange ways. Contractors quit without notice. Construction schedules collapsed under a cascade of minor, but relentless problems, injuries, equipment failures, unexplained structural issues that defied inspection reports. Costs ballooned far beyond projections. Within a few years, the owners faced financial strain, severe enough to force a quiet sale, despite having entered with substantial wealth. Those who followed fared no better. One owner intended to transform Winfield Hall into a symbol of revival. Hosting grand events meant to erase its dark reputation. Yet social gatherings repeatedly ended early. Guests complained of sudden illness, panic attacks, or overwhelming unease. Attendance dwindled. Rumors resurfaced. The owner's personal life unraveled alongside the project. Divorce, legal disputes, and mounting debt trailing closely behind. The mansion changed hands again, this time under circumstances few wished to discuss. Another buyer saw Winfield Hall not as a home, but as an investment opportunity. Plans were drawn to convert it into a luxury resort or private institution. Yet permits were delayed, funding partners withdrew unexpectedly, and key documents vanished or were found altered. The project collapsed before it could begin. Within months, the owner's broader business empire began to fail. As though whatever misfortune touched the mansion spread outward into every connected venture. Some owners attempted to live there privately, believing isolation might shield them from the estate's reputation. These individuals lasted the shortest time of all. Reports emerged of sleeplessness, paranoia, and sudden health declines. One owner reportedly occupied only a fraction of the mansion, refusing to enter certain wings altogether. Another left abruptly after a single winter, abandoning furniture and personal belongings without explanation. What unsettled observers most was the similarity in outcomes. The misfortunes varied in form: financial ruin, illness, legal trouble, emotional collapse. But the sequence felt eerily consistent: enthusiasm, denial, subtle disruption, escalation, exit. No owner ever left improved by their time at Winfield Hall. Even attempts to sanitize the mansion's image failed. Publicists were hired. Stories were reframed as exaggerations. Tours emphasized beauty and history rather than rumor. Yet behind closed doors, staff turnover remained high, and caretakers quietly avoided certain areas after dark. Those tasked with maintaining the property often stayed only briefly, citing reasons that sounded reasonable but felt incomplete. Over time, the mansion itself became stigmatized within elite circles. It was admired from a distance, but avoided up close. Buyers expressed interest, then withdrew after private viewings. Deals collapsed during final negotiations. Some claimed the air inside felt wrong. Others said the silence was oppressive, unnatural for a place of such size. Winfield Hall did not resist ownership openly. It accepted each new resident quietly, almost patiently. And then, without spectacle, it seemed to dismantle their plans, their health, or their stability, leaving them no choice but to leave behind the grand estate that promised everything and delivered nothing but loss. Long before historians or journalists dared to frame Winfield Hall as anything unusual, the people who lived around it had already reached their conclusion. The shift in perception did not happen overnight. It grew slowly, carried in lowered voices, half-finished sentences, and glances toward the mansion that lingered a moment too long. At first, locals spoke of it as unlucky, then troubled. Eventually, a different word took hold, cursed. Neighbors noticed patterns outsiders dismissed. New owners arrived hopeful and visible, making improvements, hosting staff, speaking confidently about the future. Within a few years, sometimes months, the lights went dark again. Cars stopped coming and going. Curtains remained drawn. Then the property would quietly return to the market, often after a personal disaster. No one wanted to explain. To the locals, coincidence stopped being a convincing explanation. Stories accumulated. Fishermen along the shore claimed the mansion looked different at night, its windows appearing unevenly, lit even when officially vacant. Some swore they saw lights moving from room to room when no one was supposed to be inside. Others spoke of hearing distant sounds carried on the wind, low tones, like chanting or humming, though the estate sat too far away for ordinary noise to travel so clearly. Children grew up with rules about the place. Don't trespass. Don't linger near the gates after sunset. Don't take shortcuts through the property, no matter how quiet it looks. Teenagers who ignored these warnings returned shaken, telling stories of sudden cold, of being overwhelmed by fear without knowing why, of hearing their names whispered from behind locked doors. Most refused to go back. Older residents began to frame the mansion's history in more ominous terms. They believed something had been disturbed during its construction, something buried, summoned, or uncovered when the foundations were laid. Some claimed the land itself was never meant to hold such a structure, that the mansion's size and intent forced something dormant into awareness. Others believed the rituals rumored to have taken place inside didn't simply happen there, but changed the house permanently. What made the curse feel real was how it seemed to persist regardless of time or renovation. New owners replaced stone, rewired walls, repainted rooms, yet the same unease returned. The mansion resisted being made ordinary. It rejected every attempt to turn it into just another luxury estate. Locals said the house remembered what had happened inside it and did not forgive. Even those who tried to rationalize the stories admitted one thing: Winfield Hall felt wrong. Not decayed. Not haunted in the theatrical sense, but charged. Heavy. As if the air inside carried a residue that could not be cleaned or explained away. People described feeling watched before ever learning the mansion's history, as though the house introduced itself before rumors could. Eventually, the belief solidified into something almost communal. Winfield Hall was no longer judged by evidence or records. It was judged by outcome. No one prospered there. No one left untouched. And whatever caused that, whether arrogance, obsession, or something far older, was believed to still be present, waiting patiently inside the walls. To the locals, the question was never if the mansion was cursed. It was what had been awakened there, and whether it was ever truly alone again. And so Winfield Hall remains, not as a forgotten relic, but as a warning carved into stone. Its towering walls still stand, flawless and silent, holding secrets no renovation has ever erased. Generations have come and gone, fortunes have risen and collapsed. Yet the mansion endures, unchanged in purpose, unmoved by time. Those who pass by feel it, even if they know nothing of its history. A heaviness in the air, an instinct to look away. Perhaps Winfield Hall is not cursed in the way legends describe. Perhaps it is something far more unsettling, a place where obsession, power, and forbidden curiosity were embedded so deeply into its creation that they became part of its identity. A house that remembers every intention poured into it. A structure that reflects back whatever darkness is brought inside. Whatever the truth may be, one fact remains undeniable. No one ever truly owned Winfield Hall. They only stayed for a while, until the house decided otherwise.